Hello, and welcome to the Heartland Institute's show on every Friday at 12 noon on Central Time, and it's Climate Change Roundtable. This is the weekly show for all climate realists around the world to see pretty smart discussions about what's happening in the climate. And really, I guess it's designed to be a pushback against the media narratives that you see everywhere, that every single event that happens outside, whether it's weather, extreme weather, normal weather, everything is blamed on human activity causing climate change. Well, this is the show for you if you want some information to push back at that narrative. The regular host of this show is Andy Singer. He is absent today, so I'm happy to fill in for him. My name is Jim Lakely. I'm the vice president of the Heartland Institute, and we have two of our regular three crew here today for the program. And to start off the introductions is with H. Sterling Burnett. He's the director of the Arthur B. Robinson Center on Climate and Environmental Policy at the Heartland Institute. And he comes to us from Dallas, Texas, where I'm sure it's a bit warm today. Is that right, Sterling?
It is, yeah, but I'm not complaining. At first, I have air conditioning, and second, I have a pool.
That's good. And it is, early May in Texas, so it's supposed to be warm. In fact,
I will complain come July and August.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm here in northern Illinois, and it's been 90 degrees for the last 3 days, so that must be global warming. We'll get to that in a minute. Also joining us today is research fellow at the Heartland Institute for Energy Policy, Linnea Lueken. She comes to us from even warmer, I suppose, Louisiana.
Yeah, probably. I mean, it's in the high 90s all week here, so not too much warmer than you. At a certain point, it doesn't feel worse, especially with the kind of humidity that we have here. So luckily, it hasn't been too humid. That's really the killer, though. That's when you open up your door and are immediately just like soaked.
Yep.
You have that like gross sheen on your skin from the humidity in the air because it's like 110% humidity. So might as well be in Atlantis.
Yeah, well, in Chicago, I don't like the weather about 6 months a year. I like the weather about 4 months a year, but they're not all together. And then the summers they're kind of sticky around here as well. But,
Yeah,
that's North America seasons,
you were talking about the heat in Chicago. Isn't it the case, however, that y'all have had an unusually late and cold winter recently? I mean, I've been watching things in the Midwest that y'all are getting hammered up there.
Yeah, it's been, we have Heartlanders. Betty Grandy is another Heartlander that we have. We're sprinkled all around the country. She lives quite outside of Fargo, North Dakota. She lives in Williston, actually, in that area. And she's had one of the most tough winters that she can remember. And she lived there her whole life. It was pretty long. And here in the Chicagoland area, I mean, I only needed to use my snowblower about 3 or 4 times this year. But the cold weather, and this spring was like the worst. It was, I have a little bit of a sunburned nose because I went outside last Saturday on the first actual sunny day out of the last 55 days, I think, in the Chicago area. And I got a little carried away and didn't put on any sunscreen because I couldn't find it because I didn't need it forever. And so I got a little sunburn. But yeah, it was a pretty cold and wet and miserable spring this year in Chicago. But things are looking up. It's a beautiful day today.
There you go.
Well, if I want to ask our listeners, or I should say our viewers here, we are on YouTube. We're also on Rumble. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. So anywhere that you're watching this, please hit that like button, share this video with friends, and become a regular. Make this Friday afternoon, or wherever you may be around the world, part of your Friday, because it's usually a pretty informative show, and we love to have audience participation in the chat. So we like to put those comments, if they're good, on the screen. So, when we first conceived this is the 15th episode. When we first conceived this show, it was kind of part of the purpose of it was to kind of highlight it. This may be the first time we've ever done it, Sterling. It's to highlight this weekly email that you put out almost every week. We give you a week off here and there. We're not slave drivers, but
yep.
The Climate Change Weekly email. You can find this at heartlanddailynews.com. You can find it at heartland.org. And we just released it this morning, Climate Change Weekly number 434. It's climate catastrophe du jour season again. So Sterling felt it was good since we have the change of the seasons here. To note how the media seems obsessed with declaring certain times of the year a different kind of climate catastrophe season. I'm going to scroll down here to his, I think, fourth paragraph and read it for you. Old missives and foolish sporadic claims of climate-exasperated ills aside, there are certain types of events climate change is, like clockwork, claimed every year to be causing or worsening. Most of these occur in the spring and summer, which is where we are now. Interestingly, each of these weather-related events have occurred with regularity for millennia, with such regularity, in fact, that they have seasons named after them. In particular, I'm talking about allergy season, tornado season, wildfire season, and hurricane season. So Sterling, I think this is a pretty fun and interesting way to get into, to alert people that get this this newsletter from us about, kind of be on the lookout for, frankly, propaganda that each of these seasons is somehow unique because of human-caused climate change.
Yeah, I mean, look, I can't speak for everyone else, but I grew up with allergies, seasonal allergies. I got them in the fall and in the spring. I had asthma. I suffered with that. I took medication for it. We have medication. So the one truth, perhaps, that climate change is affecting is it's starting the allergy season, the onset of it, a little bit earlier. Why? Because spring's coming a little bit earlier. The growing season, plants are growing faster and lusher, not just crops, but crops, trees, bushes, everything. And you know what? That's good for the world. So it's bad for allergy sufferers. Don't get me wrong. I'm taking my medicine regularly. But it's good for the world to have more plant life and more lush plant life. It's good for pollinators. People have been worried in recent years about bees. Well, this is good for bees. It's good for other animals and insects that spread pollen. But they have just co-opted it. Everything is climate change. The first paragraph in my thing goes through that. But these seasons, look, we had a tornado season as long as I've been alive. I live in Tornado Alley. I've seen them my whole life. And we know when to usually expect them. We've always had a hurricane season. For as long as we've been tracking such things, and even before we were tracking them, we had seasonal hurricanes that occurred every year. You could keep trim like clockwork. And wildfires. Okay, there are regions of this country that are arid, naturally arid, and they're drought prone. And wildfires are common occurrences, especially if they're not managed. And so they just leap on this. We got, a hurricane. Every hurricane is climate change. Every sneeze is climate change. Every wildfire is climate change. It's like, hold it. They existed before. And to know if climate change is affecting them, you got to go to the data. And when you go to the data, you find out, well, not so much.
Yeah. Well, I don't, Andy Singer, the usual producer of this, has a few more things, a few more bells and whistles that he's good at than me, so we can pull up all these things. You can actually look at a lot of this data in the new book we have called Climate at a Glance. If you go to heartland.org, you will see a link to that book, and it has sections on extreme weather, like tornadoes and hurricanes, and then things like droughts, which we're going to get to a little bit later. It just seems, Linnea, that the weather is just never perfect enough. If we have too many, and actually the data shows that hurricane frequency and all of that, and the strength of hurricanes, I know it was, I think 3-4 years ago, Sterling could correct me if I'm wrong, broke the longest record for a major hurricane failing to hit the continental United States. And then since then, we've only had a few. And it's a lot less than it was in the 80s when I was a kid. Because I remember a lot of tornadoes, 80s and 90s. We've had fewer. I'm sorry, tornadoes. We've had fewer hurricanes today. Tornado data shows consistently from the 1970s until today. The line goes like this. You can find that chart in Climate at a Glance as well. You should also go to Climate Realism with climaterealism.com, a great place to see these sorts of stories. But Linnea, it just seems like the weather just can, no matter what happens, there's something wrong. Like there's there's this idea that unless the weather is like it is today in northern Illinois, absolutely gorgeous and perfect, if a bit warm, that there's something that we've done to make the weather gods angry. But varying weather is just part of nature and always has been.
Right. And the amazing thing is when things are going really well, when you see that there are, lulls in certain storm activities or something, they're able to twist that around and say, this is terrible. Normally we have floods at this time of year and now we're not having them. So clearly there's something wrong, or you know, if anything goes right, if it's, oh, we're in the middle of a drought, that's a terrible thing, and then the drought breaks and you get some rain, well, that's a terrible thing because now you have some landslides and stuff. This happens. California is the most obnoxious state in the union about this, and I know people who live there who just believe everything the news tells them, and it's amazing to watch someone complain one week, talk to you and say, oh, this is terrible. We can't water our lawn because there's a water shortage and all of our grass is dead and our trees are dying and stuff because we're in the drought. This is just the worst thing ever. I can't believe that, climate change is causing this, blah, blah, blah. And then literally 1 month later, the rainy season or the monsoon season hits for the Pacific, and they're getting rain and they're getting mudslides and stuff in Southern California in particular. And they're like, I've never seen rain like this before. This is unbelievable. We've never seen this. This is so bad. And it's, you go through these cycles every couple of years in California. It's common. Everyone who lives there should know that it's just a natural part of the Pacific decadal oscillation and El Nino and La Nina.
And La Nina. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a matter of different regions of the earth have these different multi-year cycles, and sometimes they hit harder than others.
Right.
And there's really no indication that it's getting worse.
Yeah, I lived in Southern California from 2005 to 2010, and all we heard about was drought, and then we heard about floods, and then we heard about how it's actually good news. We had those. I guess it has to do with the ocean currents and a La Nina or an El Nino year, but it was really good news when we saw those storms, chucking down from Alaska and just dumping all of this snow and moisture into California, into the snowpack. And the problem with the drought again, we're going to get to drought in a minute, and it's going to be related to our next topic. We're going to hit wildfires here in a second. But the problem with California and drought has at least as much to do with water management and the fact that they haven't built a new dam in California in, I don't know, 60 years. It could be longer than that. And yet as the population, so the water system for California, the water distribution system for California was brilliantly designed by some of the greatest engineers of the 20th century. And then they basically didn't do anything to improve it or expand it, while the population of California, I think, has probably tripled since they built that system.
Let's be clear. California was an arid region and one of the least when Native Americans dominated this continent. California was one of the least populated regions on the continental U.S. because it is so arid. They didn't go to the beach for vacations. And they didn't have the water supplies. And in the early part of the 20th century, the federal government decided it was going to make California, the desert, bloom like a rose, literally the Bureau of Reclamation's mandate. And they did. What they did is they dammed rivers all across the West and shipped the water to California. And that led to huge population growth. And as Jim pointed out, and they haven't managed it ever since. And so when I hear you, the lake, which is not a natural lake, Lake Mead, Lake Powell, none of them are natural. They're created by dams. They're the lowest level they've been in X number of years. Well, okay. How many people across the West are drawing water from those lakes compared to how many people were drawing water from them 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago when they were or 60 or more years ago when they were created? Huge population growth across the Western United States, in part because we provided them with water. But there's only so much water, even when you're not in drought, there's only so much water going into those lakes compared to how much more is coming out, not just in California, but in Colorado, in Arizona, in New Mexico. All these places are drawing from those lakes. And when the rain is not falling as much, and it's not right now, uh, it's not as if the drought is historic. And we'll get to that, Jim. You mentioned it. But it's that you've got ever more people making claims on the same amount of water. He's talking. I can't hear him.
That's right. I muted my microphone again. I did that on yesterday's podcast. But maybe we'll have an engineer on. I've always wondered, what is the feasibility of piping water from the Great Lakes, which, down to the Great Southwest? Think big. I don't know.
But is that what you really want? I mean, look, then they'll just complain more about, then the upper Midwest will complain about water not being in the lakes. The point is, there are certain regions that were never intended to support the number of people that live there today.
Right.
Nature established a bioregion that was arid and dry and didn't support people. We artificially created a different bioregion there, but nature's coming back, and it's like, look, droughts come. California has suffered 200-year droughts in the past. Yep. Well, if this happens now, we've got a lot more people there than were there when it was suffered at 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago.
Well, and isn't California among the states that make it illegal to collect rainwater for your own home use too?
I believe that is true. There are a number of states that do that, and so government creates problems, blames other factors for these problems, and then it has to expand and grow to create the solutions to those problems, which create other problems. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, I just opened a Pandora's box, but on that one. So let's get to some of the other things. We talked about seasons. That's what this is about. The Climate Change Weekly, number 434. And if you have not subscribed to that, you really must. All you have to do is go to heartland.org/subscribe, and you can get that sent into your email box every Friday morning. But you talk here in your piece, Sterling, about one of the seasons is wildfire season. You note that it started earlier than usual this year in the desert Southwest. Never once to let a crisis go to waste. Numerous media outlets blame the early start of the fire season to human-caused climate change, warning it was a harbinger of worse things to come. For instance, on consecutive days in May, Yahoo News published an article titled "Climate Change is Why New Mexico's Wildfire Season Started Early This Year." And MarketWatch followed up with one titled "The Southwest is on Fire. Climate change is one of the reasons why those wildfires are earlier and more intense." Another one of our great websites, climaterealism.com, we responded to this. What was our response, Sterling Burnett?
Well, not true. Earlier, yes. Unique, not at all. So if you look, a little later in that, I point out that in New Mexico, since 1995 or 6, I believe, I can't, there've been more than 12 wildfires break out in April. They all these stories talk like, no, they never have wildfires in April. Well, 12 of them across the course of like 5 years. So not uncommon. It's not typical, but it's not uncommon. And one of the worst wildfires in Arizona's history started in April, the Lone Fire. The point is, there is nothing unique about wildfires in April in the Southwest. In West Texas, we get them, another arid region. And as far as the intensity, well, you got a lot of reasons they're intense. And in fact, some of the people that they interviewed for these stories just go through this litany of reasons. Linnea wrote a story about this, the grasses that build up. And why did the grasses build up? Well, because we weren't in drought 2 years ago. During the monsoon season, we had lush rains and a lot of growth. So then the drought comes along, the grasses dry up, and boom, and someone starts a fire. Another fire.
Right. Well, I mean, it's naturally cyclical. If you've lived in Southern California, you know that the only thing worse than drought is rain, because the rain creates the fuel for the next wildfire season. And it's I don't know, just seems like a natural cycle to me. Linnea, can you talk a little bit more about these? As you say here in your piece, Sterling, maybe I'm asking the wrong person, maybe Linnea can add in here. But you say the two additional factors contributing to Western wildfires in recent years are the spread of invasive grasses like bufflegrass, red broma, cheatgrass, which spread quickly and dry out early. Where did those invasive grasses come from? Did they naturally get in there?
No. The short answer is no. A lot of these grasses are things that people brought over from Europe or Asia. As with many plants that you see around you today, a lot of the brush that fills up the woods and stuff that you see nowadays is invasive, more likely than not from Asia. The cheatgrass in particular has a much earlier gestation time than the native Arizona, New Mexico grasses. So what happens is it goes to seed earlier, but once those seeds start dropping off, it's drying out. So now you have this grass that's dried out way earlier than the native grasses, and it becomes very flammable. So that's part of the reason why the wildfires are able to start earlier in places like New Mexico and Arizona. And Nevada is particularly bad for the cheatgrass. And a lot of these non-native grasses have the same problem. They have a different period of gestation than the natives, so they're able to dry out earlier.
And one of the reasons that they spread so readily in the West when they were brought over is, once again, government policy encouraging ranching in the West in arid regions, providing water for ranchers. When native lands are overgrazed, these grasses take over. They replace the native plants when they're overgrazed. Well, they're overgrazed because government piped in water so you could have cattle on these, because we wanted agriculture everywhere. Government knew best
because they spread easier.
Easier
and more quickly than the native grasses do. Additionally, what did we talk about? The human population. So the National Wildfires, or the Forest Service, says that something like 85% of wildfires are human started, which is just an unbelievably high number. And over time, more and more people are moving to the West. In particular, Colorado and New Mexico and Arizona have had huge growth, and the suburbs around Las Vegas. So more and more people are moving out into these areas. More and more people are making use of the national parks and going out camping on public lands and stuff out west. And so you have more, I guess, flashpoints, I guess you could say, for starting fires, just because there are more people to start fires.
Yeah, let's be clear. Not all these fires, 85% of fires are due to human causes, but no one's claiming that these are all arson. That's not the case.
No,
most of them are negligence.
Accidental. Yeah,
most of them are negligence. But even the negligent fires wouldn't start had people not been there, and people are increasingly moving there. Think about Arizona. How many golf courses do you think were in Arizona when I was born? I'd wager none. But maybe there was one. Maybe there was a municipal golf course in Phoenix.
I don't think you're that old, Sterling.
Well, I'm 58, so it's been a while. My question is, how many are there today? And so when you talk about we're running out of water, we can't fight the fires that we want to fight. We're running out of water. Well, how many golf courses are being watered from the water in the West, from these lakes that are disappearing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you talk about those wildfires in Northern California a couple of years ago. It drove, I forget the name of the fire, but it was the one started by was it PG&E? Is that the name of the power company out there in California?
Yeah,
where they
Pacific
had
Gas and Electric. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, they had they had a malfunction with their transmission lines, and it caused a spark, which caused a fire, which drove thousands of people out of their homes. It killed some people. It destroyed enormous numbers of property, and drove, frankly, Anthony Watts, another one of our climate team here at the Heartland Institute. He drove him out of his home. He was concerned for his safety, and he barely got out. And that's obviously tragic. That's terrible. But these wildfires that happen, I mean, it's a natural cycle. These things have to happen in the mountains of Southern California and California and the mountains out west, you should just say in general, because it's part of the natural process of destruction and renewal that happens in these places. And it's the way nature would manage the brush and the forests and all that stuff. And the United States, we could mitigate it by managing our forests a little better. But the second big factor, as you just alluded to, Sterling, is that there are more people living up there in the hills than there used to be. A generation or two ago, those fires would just burn and it wouldn't affect anybody, any individual. But now we have all these people living in these areas now. So of course, you're going to have to deal with some of the natural effects of living in a place that is prone to fire.
People have simultaneously moved to the nuisance at the same time as our laws have said you can't clear brush around your home for endangered species.
Right.
You can't build fences for endangered species. You can't. They've got conflicting laws. Oh, you got to cut your trees back, but you can't cut these trees back for endangered species. And then, as you say, the truth is, if you look at U.S. fire history and Western fire history, we had a steep decline in wildfires from the early part of the 20th century to the late 1980s because we were actively managing our forest. We were logging. We were taking out 12 billion board feet a year, and we're down below 2 billion board feet a year now. And this all happened after Reagan. It started under George, the first Bush. Was he Herbert Walker?
Yep.
George Herbert Walker Bush. He, took up the environmental mantle, and the logging started to decline steeply. Not only that, they started to remove roads. You have thousands of miles of logging roads and forests that they started to close down and rip out. So, and they went to natural management. Well, natural management with forest building up and brush building up means burn, baby, burn. And when you rip out the roads, you can't get to the back areas to fight the fires before they reach your neighborhoods.
Yeah,
those are decisions that our government made that are exacerbating, that are making wildfires, which are a natural feature of Western United States, making them worse.
Well, and that's a good transition into, the population issues and the government management issues is a good transition into the hurricane issue as well. We're going to hear all summer long that there are hurricanes being caused by climate change. And from people who live down here in Acadiana, they say it's kind of the local mythology, I guess, because everyone has their local weather mythology, is that if spring is this hot, if May is this hot, then you have a bad hurricane season. That's what they always say here. So we're all kind of thinking we might have a few bad ones that come through. But think about where we live now along the Gulf Coast. The Gulf Coast is one of the most frequently hurricane-struck coasts in the world. We are living in places that are literally under sea level, less than 30 miles from the coast, on grounds that has been aggressively managed so that it is walkable. A lot of the places like where I live now would otherwise be unnavigable swamp had it not been for the Army Corps of Engineers rerouting rivers and dredging the swamp, basically. So now we've got all these people along the west coast of Florida and Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, getting hammered by hurricanes. And I think we discussed this in the last episode, but with that kind of increase of population, of course, you're going to get an increase in the destruction that a hurricane can cause. It's just a matter of moving people in the way of them.
Right.
That's not to say that we shouldn't live here, but that we should be prepared for it and do what we can to manage our own lives around it.
Well, we've moved more people into the path of hurricanes, yet, per capita, fewer people are dying in these disasters because of modern technology. That's the irony of that.
More property is being damaged, though.
Sure.
More expensive property. But, the fact that, as Linnea started out, there's a mythology around it means it's been around for a while. It means it sort of existed before anyone ever said the word global warming anywhere. You don't develop myths in 2 years or a decade. And once again, and I'm just going to keep coming back to this, government has made this problem worse. How? Well, we encourage moral hazard. We subsidize hurricane insurance and flood insurance. When your home is destroyed, the government comes in and rebuilds it. Often, even if you didn't buy the hurricane insurance. So your neighbor who paid for the highly subsidized premium insurance, we taxpayers pick up their premiums. he sees that he was a sucker for paying even that share, and he doesn't keep the insurance up because you're going to be real big rebuilding me anyway. You rebuilt my neighbor and he didn't have insurance. So we are encouraging more and more people to build on the coast. We're encouraging hotels and things to be developed on the coast because, look, everybody likes a nice ocean view. But if you want a nice ocean view, understand it comes with the risk of hurricanes. And we, the taxpayers, shouldn't be picking up the tab. And if we weren't, there wouldn't be so many people living with nice ocean views.
Absolutely.
Well, you can also tell the development of what people have believed about weather systems along the eastern part of the United States, along the coast. When you look at the really old houses, how are they built? The really old houses are all up on stilts, or they've been built above the ground level in some way by a foot or 30 feet in some cases. And then nowadays, you know, I'm living in a neighborhood that's everyone's got their little concrete slab, and we're like 3 feet above the major water level. And then everyone gets surprised when their house gets flooded. But then you look down the street to one of the old houses that weren't just built in the last 10, 15, 20 years. One of the houses from like 1905, and it's up on 5-foot piers. And you're like, I wonder why that house is so far off the ground. Well, maybe it's because we live underwater, actually.
Yeah.
We just haven't figured it out yet.
Look, 150 years ago or more or less, New Orleans regularly flooded. And in fact, because the flood brought silt from the Mississippi into New Orleans, it was constantly building up. And so New Orleans itself was 30 feet above sea level. Now it's below sea level because the Army Corps of Engineers says flooding's bad. We're going to come in and stop the periodic regular flooding. But that means since it's naturally a swampy area, it starts to sink. Houston's sinking. We built the largest city in Texas is built on a swamp, on a floodplain. And then we're surprised when flooding occurs.
Yeah. Well, getting back into hurricanes, here's maybe you can comment on this, Sterling. One of the, we climate realists, if you follow the debates on social media like Twitter or Facebook, for instance, they'll say that that's just what the Heartland Institute says. That's just what climate deniers say. Which is why if you read climaterealism.com often, and it's basically a daily pushback against the media's narrative, false narrative about the climate, it's that we are citing almost invariably government data to prove our point. And one of these here is in this Climate Change Weekly edition, the latest one that was out this morning, Sterling, where you say the EPA, about hurricanes, you say the EPA's 2021 report titled Climate Change Indicators Tropical Cyclone Activity states, quote, since 1878, about 6 to 7 hurricanes have formed in the North Atlantic every year. Roughly 2 per year make landfall in the United States. The total number of hurricanes, particularly after being adjusted for improvements in observational methods, and the number reaching the United States do not indicate a clear overall trend since 1878.
Yeah.
Sterling I can't remember. Was Texas even a state in 1878? I mean, that is a long.
It was sadly we gave up our republic nature in 1846. So.
But so that's the EPA, that's the Environmental Protection Agency's own data shows that there is no clear overall trend, despite every news story you see on all the networks is that hurricanes are becoming more frequent and they're becoming stronger. Al Gore did an entire movie with a cyclone spinning in the wrong direction for the Northern Hemisphere on his poster. Yeah. I mean, this is like one of the greatest myths. This is right up there with the polar bears.
And let's be honest. No one has ever accused the EPA of being conservative on their claims. So for them to be saying it hasn't changed, that says something. But they're not the only ones. The National Hurricane Center, NOAA, NASA, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, supposedly the gold standard for climate claims, finds no evidence hurricanes are increasing in number or severity. So all the data points one way, all the media stories point the other. It's one of those things. Are you going to believe what we tell you, or are you going to believe the lying, hard, real world data? And they want you to believe what the headlines are.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, well, up here on the screen for the viewers, you can see this is part of the Heartland, or I'm sorry, the Climate Change Weekly email that's put out just about every Friday. Most Fridays, maybe we'll take a week off, but it also includes a link to our podcast of the week. The one this week is titled "Radical Environmentalists Have Been Lying for Decades." So if you're not a subscriber to the Environment and Climate News podcast, it's available wherever your favorite podcasts are found. So be sure to subscribe to that as well. I think we have exhausted that topic, Sterling and Linnea. And I wanted to try to play a video. Now I'm producing this from home, and my Wi-Fi here is not as good as it is at work, but I think this will work out. This was shared by Andy Singer, who I can see lurking in the comments watching today. But it's a report from CBS News about drought. And I think I only probably need to play the first 45 seconds of this. But this is another great example of the way the media spins everything that happens as not just the worst of your lifetime or your parents' lifetimes or even your great-grandparents' lifetimes, but they somehow always claim that it is the worst that ever was. This is about droughts.
Tens of millions of Americans will likely face another dangerously dry summer. According to a report from the National Weather Service this month, the mega drought that has affected western states for more than 2 decades will get worse in the coming months. It will also affect a larger area, almost 2/3 of the continental United States. The conditions are heightening fire risks and crippling water supplies. Researchers say the mega drought is the worst the region has seen in the last 1,200 years. For more on this, I want to bring in Benjamin Cook. He is a climate scientist at the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies. Benjamin, how bad could this drought conditions get this summer?
Yeah, probably not as bad as last year, but we're coming.
Wait a minute. That's all right. That's really all you got to play. The Chiron on the bottom of the screen says this is the worst drought in 1,200 years, and she asked them, this guy who is there to perpetuate the alarmist narrative says, well, it's probably not going to be as bad as last year. I'm really bad at math, but I think 1 is very far away from 1,200 as far as years go.
Yeah. So, you go back and you look at the U.S. Drought Monitor data. And what you find is in recent years, so just a few years ago, the smallest amount of the United States in recorded history was suffering from drought. It's the first time ever they'd recorded less than 40% of the United States suffering from drought. So how is this a mega drought that's never been seen in 1,200 years when just a few years ago, most of the United States were not suffering drought? Well, they say, the Western United States. Well, you go to the U.S. Drought Monitor and you go back 2 years or you go back 3 years. And what you'll find is most of the Western states weren't considered in drought at that time. A year and a half ago, something like 90% of Colorado was in drought. Today, less than 30% of Colorado is in drought. The same is true for all these other Western states. 2 years ago, none of Wyoming, I believe, was in drought. And now a lot of it is. Drought changes across the entire region. It has not been some kind of mega drought that we've never seen before. In fact, research shows in California, they suffered sometimes, we're looking at historical periods where Native Americans, populated regions of Arizona, New Mexico, sparsely in California. And based on tree ring data and things that they've looked at, they had periods where you had a 100-year drought, a 200-year drought. We're not experiencing that across the West. For them to claim that, it's not just bad journalism, it's lying. It's shoddy research. They take one study. Some group produces a single study with a headline, and everybody in the media jumps on it and believes it's true without doing any independent research. We used to have something called investigative journalists. They're not out there anymore on the climate issue.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, Sterling, because it was not related to climate, but there was another story where the media was like, a new study says X that helps the narrative. I think it might have had something to do with that virus of unknown origin, that we're not allowed to talk about on on YouTube. But it was like, one study, a new study says X, right? And so at climaterealism.com, in the research we've done for the Climate at a Glance book, we cite many papers, many studies from the peer-reviewed literature, and you never see a story. And these things, undercut the alarmist narrative. All these studies, these scientific papers undercut the alarmist media narrative. And you never see a story on CBS saying, a new study shows that like what we have on the screen right here. This is from Earth Science Reviews. This is a chart showing that a supposed 200-year drought, and red on the top is drier than normal, and down below in blue is wetter than normal. And according to this study, since 1800, there's been 2 little tiny parts of red, and most of the time in California, based on historical data, retrieving data, I presume that they're getting for this study, it's actually wetter than normal. But you just don't see that anywhere on the mainstream media, but you see it here. Climate realists know this stuff, and we have to share it ourselves on videos like this. This is why you should share this video with your friends.
Yeah, it's a shame. A study like that probably shouldn't be getting mainstream media notice anyway. A single study until it's been confirmed. But even if you wanted to give it, it's like, this study says this could be a problem, but if you got some real journalists, they say, but all these other studies and this data seems not to support that claim. So they'd at least provide. We used to call it balance, but we can't do that anymore. They put it in context. They put the study in context. And they don't do that anymore because context ruins the narrative.
Yeah.
I think that additionally, so you have the issue with the media pushing the particular narrative, and they've all been kind of roped into participating in the narrative writing. There's literally groups that are devoted to keeping journalists in line with the climate narrative. So that's going on. But I also think, and it's kind of a topic that we could probably go on a lot about, but I think that we may be well oversaturated with science news. And so what ends up happening is you get all these reports from different papers that, 20 years ago wouldn't have had all this exposure, because we have all these websites and all these news media outlets that are constantly writing articles about every new paper that comes out, every study that comes out. And it's easy for a layperson, and I would lump a lot of the media into this group, to see something. It's a peer-reviewed paper. It's got, a chunk of references at the top of it this big. It's got, 12 different authors. It's 30 pages, 40 pages long, and it's got some graphs in it. So that means it's it can't be wrong. And it's based on computer models, and you're like, well, computers are smart, so that's going on. But what people don't realize is that you can generate 1,000 of these model-based research papers, each saying something very different than the last, and still have it come out to be true according to your experiment. And it's not really a real experiment, because there's no accountability. There's no proving it. It's unfalsifiable, right? So,
which means it's not science. Look,
yeah.
40 years ago, this paper would have been read by 12 people who read that particular journal that were interested in that topic. Since the big money and the big Great Reset folks, the elite, who want to expand government control, have gotten onto the climate topic as the way to do that. Socialism died directly, so we've got to instill it indirectly through climate policy. These papers are getting published everywhere. They're getting noticed everywhere that used to academics would have only read. As importantly, even earlier this year, back in February of this year, the AP received its largest grant ever from a group of private foundations to write climate stories. So do you think the AP is going to start writing climate stories that say climate change isn't happening all of a sudden with this largest grant ever? No, They hired people to go out and find disastrous climate stories, and they're, they got their marching orders, and the marching has begun. You're
muted again.
Again, Jim.
Gosh, I thought Andy's going to kill me. See, this is why you need Andy Bag as host, so he doesn't screw up like that, like I do. But so we're planning. So we've had 14 international conferences on climate change at the Heartland Institute, from several international, most here in the United States. And I guess spoiler alert, we're planning for another one. So stay tuned for that. But one of the best, and you can find this at climateconferences.heartland.org. Look up Pat Michaels and his presentations. He gave a fantastic keynote presentation about how all the money is in alarmism. That if you're an academic and you propose doing research that goes against the climate alarmist narrative, you will not get funding. Your future as an academic, as a scientist in climate, is not very bright. And one of the problems, one of the criticisms that we get, I don't think it's very fair, but it's a fact. A lot of the scientists who speak publicly at our conferences are either they're later in their careers, they're certainly tenured, or they are retired and they're still researching and doing science on their own. And that's because you are signing a professional death warrant for yourself. If you are a scientist in your early 30s who decides to actually take a critical look at the climate modeling that, say, a guy like Michael Mann has made his entire career on, and trying to poke holes in it. What used to be called science was to take somebody else's theory, try to disprove it, try to find problems with it, so that together as a scientific community, you can come closer to the correct answer. That doesn't happen in climate science. Climate science is complete conformity these days.
Well, that's right, and you see it in the few peer-reviewed studies that get published that raise questions about one or another claim in the climate narrative, because almost all of them have this sort of I'm having a senior moment here. A disclaimer. Almost all these studies have disclaimers that say, look, our research doesn't show flooding is increasing, but we're not saying climate change isn't increasing flooding. Just our research doesn't show it. Our research doesn't show wildfires have increased over the past 50 years. But we have no doubt that climate change is increasing wildfires. So, they add these disclaimers. You didn't used to do that. If your research showed it wasn't causing more wildfires or it wasn't causing flooding, that's what your research showed, and you didn't have to say. You put it out there for other people to try and disprove your research, as you say, Jim. It was about disconfirmation. But you didn't sort of tag a disclaimer on it to cover yourself with the rest of the scientific community, saying, I'm not a denier. Climate change is causing all sorts of bad things. It's just weird that our research doesn't show these bad things.
Well, yeah, I think that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a little bit here and there, and you didn't see it 5 years ago, that somebody will come out with a paper that has a problem with just a small smidge of the entire narrative, and then just, like you said, have that disclaimer. But whether it's with hurricanes, I mean, the EPA's own data says, there's no large term trend in the increased frequency of hurricanes in the United States. That's almost a whisper. Nobody's going to cover that. But it's like these little pieces, and they're not connected. They're never brought together except, by the Heartland Institute.
Right.
It just drives me nuts that people on like the Weather Channel and stuff can say things that are so easily refuted by just looking up the data that's available from our public institutions, which probably shouldn't be trusted for their data collection anyway. But if even their data refutes the hurricane argument, the tornado argument, the wildfire argument, if you roll back their timeline long enough, and they've done some sneaky things over there at the Forest Service to try and hide that wildfire trend. But all it takes is a quick search to verify. That's all these journalists have to do. And they don't. And it's either because they totally trust the people who are leading their narrative, or because they do not care that the data refutes them. And to them, it's the ends that justify the means.
or they're lazy, or even, to be fair to the writers in the press, they actually want to get their byline published, and their editors aren't going to let it go through if it says bad. This looks like bunk to me. So
I'm a recovering journalist, so let me just speak for that profession myself. This is not a mistake. This is on purpose. So with the journalists, this is, look, the skeptics of climate alarmism are basically blackballed from even commenting, even replying in opinion pieces to the alarmist stuff that's printed as news in these pages for at least a decade. I think the policy at the Los Angeles Times was announced at least a decade ago, that they declared, we will no longer publish any letters to the editor by anybody who questions climate alarmism. Well, they didn't put it that way. They said, we will not publish letters by climate deniers. And that is not what we are. That is not what people were writing in about. They were challenging the narrative of human-caused climate change, catastrophic catastrophic climate change caused by humans, by citing data that we share on our websites every day. And so this is a blackball operation. This is a censorship issue. What was it? Just Twitter the other day said that they weren't allowing anybody to promote tweets that had any deviation from the narrative of climate alarmism. And then these things just go on, and nobody says anything. Nobody in the mainstream media says, I think the free exchange of ideas is actually healthy for our country, but also for science. No, you don't get that.
No, well, they've switched, following John Stuart Mill's dictum that free speech and debate is always a good thing, to Lenin's, a lie told often enough and not refuted becomes the truth.
Yeah. Well, on that happy note, I think I will begin the awkward transition to wrapping up this another edition of Climate Change Roundtable. You can tune in every Friday at noon Central Time. We started the show going only a half an hour, but by popular demand and my long-running mouth, we've gone quite beyond that today. I want to remind you to go ahead and hit subscribe to this channel, which is probably the Heartland Tube channel on YouTube. Hit the bell so that you get a notification. You're supposed to. Sometimes people don't get it. I don't know. Maybe we're being shadow banned, but hit the bell as well. And also definitely subscribe to Climate Change Weekly. That way you will also get reminders of when this show is coming on, maybe even with a calendar reminder. So you can participate like you've seen many people do already in the comments. So that's the Climate Change Roundtable for this week. Say goodbye, Sterling.
Take care. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Say goodbye, Linnea.
Bye, and everyone who's in the way of our little heat wave here. Take your weekend to go sip a margarita at a pool somewhere.
That's right. And crank up that AC.
Yeah.
It's just fine. You're not going to kill the planet with it. Thanks for being with us today. We will see you next week.